May our hearts be ready to receive your word, Lord, our ears to hear you, that we may act on it through your mercy and compassion. Amen. I have to say, not one of the very best parables, I don't think, this one. I haven't got terribly much to say about the Old Testament reading. I just wanted it read because I love that first verse. So Jacob took his 2 wives and his 2 maids and his 11 children. I hope one day I will have something to preach about that. But nothing at the moment, I'm afraid. But the parable that we heard from Luke's Gospel, I don't think is one of the very best. I think the problems with it are that lots of bits of it are embarrassing to us, especially today. And I don't think the whole way it works, the analogy, is awfully compelling. It's a major problem, that, because of all of the parables that Jesus told, this one, out of many of them, scholars are fairly convinced is absolutely definitely historical. So we really have to face it without the ability to hide behind it. It's perhaps Lucan invention or a questionable historicity. Here are the words of Jesus. What on earth do we do with them when they don't seem quite right? It doesn't work for me terribly well because I think the argument is meant to be that we compare the unjust judge to God and we compare the widow to ourselves. That seems to be what it's about. It's what the rhetorician would call an a fortiori argument, an argument from a stronger position to a weaker one. It's an argument we hear quite often during the Gospel, and especially in Paul's writing. Paul likes this formula of argument that goes, if A, and we all know that A is true, then how much more surely B, because A is a more bold statement than B is, and if you believe A, well then you've got to believe B. And Jesus does it sometimes as well. That the one that strikes me most readily is the field of lilies. If God clothes these lilies of the field, and consider how much more he cares about you, then surely he'll clothe you as well. I think that one works. I'm not sure that this one does. The idea here, if that analogy is going to hold, is something like, here's this wicked judge who doesn't care about what people think about him terribly much, and he's approached by a widow, and a widow is just a type, an archetype in the biblical text normally, meaning someone who has absolutely no power, someone who is the least and the last. And within that world, within that first century world, she shouldn't be engaging in any legal discussions. She should have the man of her household doing that on her behalf. But here she is, a powerless, poor woman with no one to champion her, and she's going up against this unjust judge. And the idea's got to be that this wicked judge, even he will relent against this absolutely nobody, and he'll vindicate her eventually because of her persistence. Well, does that mean then that we should think, therefore, how much will God relent more than this unjust judge? Well, I don't think so, because why does God need to relent in the first place? This judge only needs to relent because he starts off being unjust, and she pesters away for justice, and finally he says, okay, even though I'm this evil and wicked person, I'm willing to grant you justice. Who is this God who says, I'm unjust, but eventually I'm willing to grant you justice? And the other reason that the judge relents is because he says, I don't wish to be showed up. It's that phrase that, so she won't eventually wear me out. And that literally translates to, so she won't give me a black eye. That's what it says in the Greek. It doesn't mean that literally. It's an idiom of the day that either means she won't wear me out, or maybe a better phrasing would be, so she won't kind of darken my face in the public arena, so she won't shame me publicly. Well, I'm not sure that I believe in a God who's too worried about being shamed publicly. I care more about a God who seeks truth and seeks justice regardless of how that makes humans think about him. I'm not sure that this analogy between the unjust judge and God can hold. I think that the separation is just too much. One scholar wriggles out of this by saying, ultimately, the exact reason for the judges yielding to the widow's request has no corresponding reality. That is that when we do the bit of analogy, when we say that the judge is God, well, the reason why the judge yields, we can't write that into the reason that God relents. That doesn't work. And the scholar goes on to say, what the parable seeks to teach cannot be why God will bring justice for his people, but that he will. Well, that sounds more like it to me, but that is very costly. It's costly because we have to say, if what the story initially makes us feel is that there should be an analogy between the unjust judge and God, and initially we think, well, that's a bit odd. And the way we get round that is by saying, oh no, it's not what the story seems to be saying to us. Well, then we've just got to admit that it's poor storytelling. I mean, the whole point of a parable is to explain a concept to a people. If it's this complex, if we have to deny the obvious links, I call that poor storytelling. And there are other elements that are embarrassing as well. There's this commendation by Luke at the start that the parable is about praying always. Well, only a few chapters before, the disciples have asked Jesus how they should pray, and Jesus gives them this kind of 15-second prayer. It's a version of the Lord's Prayer, much shorter than the one we use in our worship, which we take primarily from Matthew. It's 15 or 20 seconds worth of speaking. And yet here we're told to pray always. What on earth does that mean? And we're told that, I tell you, God will quickly grant justice to them. And yet we know that there are people, from our experience, who are in great situations of great injustice, who are faithfully praying to God, and are never vindicated here and now. And if their vindication takes place, it takes place only after their deaths, in the accomplishment of their lives in heaven. And then it goes on to talk about the Son of Man coming again and how quickly he'll come. And that's embarrassing too, and that's been embarrassing for Luke and for Paul. You see it through the evolution of Paul's writings that this is something that he's really worried about, because he thinks that Jesus will return within that first generation, and then he doesn't. And then every generation of the church has hoped that Christ will return in their generation. And we have to ask that question that makes us feel uncomfortable, Lord, when will you return? And we live with the hope that it will be tonight or tomorrow, but we continue to struggle with that. Now, those last three things that I suggested were a bit embarrassing. They all come from Luke's commentary, the first verse and verses 6, 7, and 8 that surround the parable proper. And I was reading through this parable, and something struck me. This is what the parable says. It says, in that city there was a widow who kept coming to him and saying, "Grant me justice against my opponent." For a while he refused, yet later he said to himself, "Though I have no fear of God and no respect for anyone, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will grant her justice so that she may not wear me out by continually coming." No reference to prayer at all in that parable. The reference to prayer only comes at the start, where Luke is commentating on why Jesus told them that, and says Jesus told them a parable about prayer. I think maybe we can redeem the difficulty of this parable by saying, well, perhaps it's not specifically about prayer. What I think is the most difficult is this analogy between God and the unjust judge. Well, say then that the unjust judge was never meant to be thought of as God. That seems much more plausible in my mind. What is this unjust judge then? Well, if the widow is an archetype of the powerless and the poor, maybe the unjust judge is an archetype of the rich, the powerful and the influential person. That person who controls the fortunes and the lives of others. And I've seen that judge, and I think I've probably been that judge too. And I imagine that we can think of situations in our own lives where we have been in control of the fortunes of others. The one that strikes me most obviously is engaging with homeless people or people begging on the streets. And they say, have you got any money that you can give me? And I say, oh no, I'm really sorry, I don't. And then they start following me, and I feel like pestering me, and oh, come on, please, have you got anything? And eventually you hand over some coins, or you pull a sandwich out of your backpack, or whatever it is, in order that you're not shamed in front of everyone in the public square. Just leave me alone. Be done with you. Here, I'm paying you off. That's what the unjust judge does. This is going to hurt my public image. Fine, I'll relent. I'll pay you off. Actually, I think for the majority of the time, we're the judge and not the widow. Certainly, in a global perspective, we are incredibly wealthy, incredibly powerful, in control of our own lives for the most part. We have access to all sorts of resources denied to most people. So I think maybe this parable makes more sense, at least more sense to us, if it's a parable about justice. I think it's about persistently pursuing justice. And the truth that it tells us is that when we do that, sometimes it's going to make us and others feel socially awkward. And here's the other truth about it, that when other people are persistently pursuing justice in our presence, it's going to make us feel awkward too. And that's because society is so used to injustice, and it goes out of its way to protect it. We make it such that it's shameful to rock the boat. We make it so that if you want to confront injustice, at some point you're going to have to say, I think what you're doing is not right. And we're taught from a young age that it's not all right to besmirch other people's good character, to question the goodness of what they're doing. To even consider doing that is shameful. I was at Hadley Primary School talking to the children there, year 5 and year 6, about what I get up to as a minister in the church in this area, and what the church is doing, and they were asking me all sorts of questions. How many hours I worked, how much wine I got through on a Sunday, all sorts of things. And then one of the little girls put up her hand and she said, how often do you get paid and how much? And it was at that point that her teacher said, Laura, we talked about this before the class and we said that you weren't to ask that question. And I said, no, please, I'd really like to answer that, because the church has got a lot to say about how we use our money. That's really important. That shouldn't be a taboo subject, especially to ask of a priest. So I told her that I had a house that came with the job and that I earned £22,000 and how often I was paid and how it worked. And the teacher was a little aghast that I was willing to so openly share this information. And I think that is a devastating lie that our society perpetuates, that you're not allowed to ask how much people earn. It's the same lie that says it's not okay if you haven't got anything and you see someone who's got lots of stuff to ask them if you can have some of it. I mean, that's completely absurd. Of course that's okay. If someone's got loads of stuff and you haven't got any and you need some, to say, can I have some, please? But we perpetuate this lie that says it's not okay, it's shameful to ask that. So here's what I think the persistent widow teaches us. I think it says, don't be afraid to unsettle societal norms, and don't be afraid to just keep banging away again and again and again, persistently in the pursuit of justice. And equally important, I think it says that when we feel unsettled because of someone's request or because of someone's actions, because of someone's protest, then we need to ask ourselves whether that's just because we've been societally conditioned towards injustice. Amen.